Tonight you are exactly where you need to be. You've found your way to a quiet little corner of the night, where the world slows down, the stars begin to whisper, and soft stories drift like moonlight through the dark. I'm so glad you're here. Before we begin tonight's story, I just want to gently ask, if you find comfort in these bedtime moments, it would mean the world if you'd take a second to like this video, subscribe, or even share it with someone else who could use a little peace. Your support helps keep this cozy space glowing night after night. Now settle in, let the day melt away, and let's begin. Once upon a time there lived on the bank of a stream a man and a woman who had a daughter. As she was an only child, and very pretty besides, they never could make up their minds to punish her for her faults or to teach her nice manners. And as for work, she laughed in her mother's face if she asked her to help cook the dinner or to wash the plates. All the girl would do was to spend her days in dancing and playing with her friends, and for any use she was to her parents, they might as well have no daughter at all. However, one morning her mother looked so tired that even the selfish girl could not help seeing it, and asked if there was anything she was able to do, so that her mother might rest a little. The good woman looked so surprised and grateful for this offer that the girl felt rather ashamed, and at that moment would have scrubbed down the house if she had been requested. But her mother only begged her to take the fishing net out to the bank of the river and mend some holes in it, as her father intended to go fishing that night. The girl took the net and worked so hard that soon there was not a hole to be found. She felt quite pleased with herself, though she had had plenty to amuse her, as everybody who passed by had stopped and had a chat with her. But by this time the sun was high overhead, and she was just folding her net to carry it home again, when she heard a splash behind her, and looking round she saw a big fish jump into the air. Seizing the net with both hands, she flung it into the water where the circles were spreading one behind the other, and, more by luck than skill, drew out the fish. "Well, you are a beauty," she cried to herself, but the fish looked up to her and said, "You had better not kill me, for if you do, I will turn you into a fish yourself." The girl laughed contemptuously and ran straight into her mother. "Look what I have caught," she said gaily, "but it is almost a pity to eat it, for it can talk, and it declares that if I kill it, it will turn me into a fish too." "Oh, put it back, implored the mother. "Perhaps it is skilled in magic, and I should die, and so would your father, if anything should happen to you." "Oh, nonsense, mother. What power could a creature like that have over me? Besides, I am hungry, and if I don't have my dinner soon, I shall be cross." And off she went to gather some flowers to stick in her hair. About an hour later, the blowing of a horn told her that dinner was ready. "Didn't I say that fish would be delicious?" she cried. And plunging her spoon into the dish, the girl helped herself to a large piece. But the instant it touched her mouth, a cold shiver ran through her. Her head seemed to flatten, and her eyes to look oddly round the corners. Her legs and her arms were stuck to her sides, and she gasped wildly for breath. With a mighty bound she sprang through the window and fell into the river, where she soon felt better, and was able to swim to the sea, which was close by. No sooner had she arrived there than the sight of her sad face attracted the notice of some of the other fishes, and they pressed around her, begging her to tell them her story. "I am not a fish at all," said the newcomer, swallowing a great deal of salt water as she spoke, "for you cannot learn how to be a proper fish all in a moment. I am not a fish at all, but a girl. At least I was a girl a few minutes ago, only—" and she ducked her head under the waves so that they should not see her crying. "Only you did not believe that the fish you caught had power to carry out its threat," said an old tunny. "Well, never mind, that has happened to all of us, and it really is not a bad life. Cheer up and come with us and see our queen, who lives in a palace that is much more beautiful than any your queens can boast of." The new fish felt a little afraid of taking such a journey, but as she was still more afraid of being left alone, she waved her tail in token of consent, and off they all set, hundreds of them together. The people on the rocks and in the ships that saw them pass said to each other, "Look what a splendid shoal," and had no idea that they were hastening to the Queen's palace. But then, dwellers on land have so little notion of what goes on in the bottom of the sea. Certainly the little new fish had none. She had watched jellyfish and nautilus swimming a little way below the surface, and beautiful colored seaweeds floating about, but that was all. Now, when she plunged deeper, her eyes fell upon strange things: wedges of gold, great anchors, heaps of pearl, inestimable stones, unvalued jewels, all scattered in the bottom of the sea. Dead men's bones were there also, and long white creatures who had never seen the light, for they mostly dwelt in the clefts of rocks where the sun's rays could not come. At first our little fish felt as if she were blind also, but by and by she began to make out one object after another in the green dimness, and by the time she had swum for a few hours, all became clear. "Here we are at last!" cried a big fish, going down into a deep valley, for the sea has its mountains and valleys just as much as the land. "That is the palace of the Queen of the Fishes, and I think you must confess that the Emperor himself has nothing so fine." "It is beautiful indeed," gasped the little fish, who was very tired with trying to swim as fast as the rest, and beautiful beyond words the palace was. The walls were made of pale pink coral, worn smooth by the waters, and round the windows were rows of pearls. The great doors were standing open, and the whole troop floated into the chamber of audience, where the queen, who was half a woman after all, was seated on a throne made of a green and blue shell. "Who are you, and where do you come from?" said she to the little fish whom the others had pushed in front. And in a low, trembling voice the visitor told her story. "I was once a girl too," answered the queen when the fish had ended, "and my father was the king of a great country. A husband was found for me, and on my wedding day my mother placed her crown on my head and told me that as long as I wore it I should likewise be queen. For many months I was as happy as a girl could be, especially when I had a little son to play with. But one morning, when I was walking in my gardens, there came a giant and snatched the crown from my head. Holding me fast, he told me that he intended to give the crown to his daughter and to enchant my husband the prince, so that he should not know the difference between us. Since then she has filled my place and been queen in my stead. As for me, I was so miserable that I threw myself into the sea, and my ladies, who loved me, declared that they would die too. But instead of dying, some wizard who pitied my fate turned us all into fishes, though he allowed me to keep the face and body of a woman. And fished we must remain till someone brings me back my crown again. "I will bring it back if you tell me what to do," cried the little fish, who would have promised anything that was likely to carry her up to earth again. And the queen answered, "Yes, I will tell you what to do." She sat silent for a moment and then went on, "There is no danger if you will only follow my counsel. And first you must return to earth, and go up to the top of a high mountain, where the giant has built his castle. You will find him sitting on the steps weeping for his daughter, who has just died while the prince was away hunting. At the last she sent her father my crown by a faithful servant. But I warn you to be careful, for if he sees you, he may kill you. Therefore, I will give you the power to change yourself into any creature that may help you best. You have only to strike your forehead and call out its name." This time the journey to land seemed much shorter than before, and when once the fish reached the shore, she struck her forehead sharply with her tail and cried, "Dear, come to me." In a moment, the small, slimy body disappeared, and in its place stood a beautiful beast with branching horns and slender legs, quivering with longing to be gone. Throwing back her head and snuffing the air, she broke into a run, leaping easily over the rivers and walls that stood in her way. It happened that the king's son had been hunting since daybreak, but had killed nothing, and when the deer crossed his path as he was resting under a tree, he determined to have her. He flung himself on his horse, which went like the wind, and as the prince had often hunted the forest before and knew all the shortcuts, he at last came up with the panting beast. "By your favor let me go, and do not kill me," said the deer, turning to the prince with tears in her eyes, "for I have far to run and much to do." And as the prince, struck dumb with surprise, only looked at her, the deer cleared the next wall and was soon out of sight. "That can't really be a deer," thought the prince to himself, reining in his horse and not attempting to follow her. "No deer ever had eyes like that. It must be an enchanted maiden, and I will marry her and no other." So turning his horse's head, he rode slowly back to his palace. The deer reached the giant's castle quite out of breath, and her heart sank as she gazed at the tall, smooth walls which surrounded it. Then she plucked up courage and cried, "Aunt, come to me!" And in a moment the branching horns and beautiful shape had vanished, and a tiny brown ant, invisible to all who did not look closely, was climbing up the walls. It was wonderful how fast she went, that little creature. The wall must have appeared miles high in comparison with her own body. Yet, in less time than would have seemed possible, she was over the top and down in the courtyard on the other side. Here she paused to consider what had best be done next, and looking about her she saw that one of the walls had a tall tree growing by it, and in the corner was a window very nearly on a level with the highest branches of the tree. "Monkey, come to me," cried the ant, and before you could turn round, a monkey was swinging herself from the topmost branches into the room where the giant lay snoring. "Perhaps he will be so frightened at the sight of me that he may die of fear, and I shall never get the crown," thought the monkey. "I had better become something else." And she called softly, "Parrot, come to me." Then a pink and gray parrot hopped up to the giant, who by this time was stretching himself and giving yawns which shook the castle. The parrot waited a little until he was really awake, and then she said boldly that she had been sent to take away the crown, which was not his any longer. Now his daughter the queen was dead. On hearing these words, the giant leapt out of bed with an angry roar, and sprang at the parrot in order to wring her neck with his great hands. But the bird was too quick for him, and flying behind his back, begged the giant to have patience, as her death would be of no use to him. "That is true," answered the giant, "but I am not so foolish as to give you that crown for nothing. Let me think what I will have in exchange." And he scratched his huge head for several minutes, for giants' minds always move slowly. "Ah, yes, that will do," exclaimed the giant at last, his face brightening. "You shall have the crown if you will bring me a collar of blue stones from the arch of St. Martin in the great city." Now when the parrot had been a girl, she had often heard of this wonderful arch and the precious stones and marbles that had been let into it. It sounded as if it would be a very hard thing to get them away from the building of which they formed a part. But all had gone well with her so far, and at any rate she could but try. So she bowed to the giant, and made her way back to the window where the giant could not see her. Then she called quickly, "Eagle, come to me." Before she had even reached the tree, she felt herself borne up on strong wings, ready to carry her to the clouds if she wished to go there, and seeming a mere speck in the sky, she was swept along till she beheld the arch of St. Martin far below, with the rays of the sun shining on it. Then she swooped down, and hiding herself behind a buttress so that she could not be detected from below, she set herself to dig out the nearest blue stones with her beak. It was even harder work than she had expected, but at last it was done, and hope arose in her heart. She next drew out a piece of string that she had found hanging from a tree, and sitting down to rest, strung the stones together. When the necklace was finished, she hung it round her neck and called, "Parrot, come to me." And a little later the pink and gray parrot stood before the giant. "Here is the necklace you asked for," said the parrot. And the eyes of the giant glistened as he took the heap of blue stones in his hand. But for all that, he was not minded to give up the crown. "They are hardly as blue as I expected," he grumbled, though the parrot knew as well as he did that he was not speaking the truth. "So you must bring me something else in exchange for the crown you covet so much. If you fail, it will cost you not only the crown, but you life also." "What is it you want now?" asked the parrot, and the giant answered, "If I give you my crown, I must have another still more beautiful, and this time you shall bring me a crown of stars." The parrot turned away, and as soon as she was outside, she murmured, "Toad, come to me." And sure enough, a toad she was, and off she set in search of the starry crown. She had not gone far before she came to a clear pool, in which the stars were reflected so brightly that they looked quite real to touch and handle. Stooping down, she filled a bag she was carrying with the shining water, and, returning to the castle, wove a crown out of the reflected stars. Then she cried as before, "Parrot, come to me." And in the shape of a parrot, she entered the presence of the giant. "Here is the crown you asked for," she said. And this time the giant could not help crying out with admiration. He knew he was beaten, and still holding the chaplet of stars, he turned to the girl. "Your power is greater than mine. Take the crown. You have won it fairly." The parrot did not need to be told twice. Seizing the crown, she sprang onto the window, crying, "Monkey, come to me." And to a monkey, the climb down the tree into the courtyard did not take half a minute. When she had reached the ground, she said again, "Ant, come to me." And a little ant at once began to crawl over the high wall. How glad the ant was to be out of the giant's castle, holding fast the crown which had shrunk into almost nothing as she herself had done, but grew quite big again when the ant exclaimed, "Deer, come to me." Surely no deer ever ran so swiftly as that one. On and on she went, bounding over rivers and crashing through tangles till she reached the sea. Here she cried for the last time, "Fish, come to me." And plunging in, she swam along the bottom as far as the palace, where the queen and all the fishes gathered together awaiting her. The hours since she had left had gone very slowly, as they always do to people that are waiting, and many of them had quite given up hope. "I am tired of staying here," grumbled a beautiful little creature, whose colors changed with every movement of her body. "I want to see what is going on in the upper world. It must be months since that fish went away." It was a very difficult task, and the giant must certainly have killed her, or she would have been back long ago, remarked another. "The young flies will be coming out now," murmured a third, "and they will all be eaten up by the river fish. It is really too bad." When suddenly a voice was heard from behind. "Look, look! What is that bright thing that is moving so swiftly towards us?" And the queen started up and stood on her tail, so excited was she. A silence fell on all the crowd, and even the grumblers held their peace and gazed like the rest. On and on came the fish, holding the crown tightly in her mouth, and the others moved back to let her pass. On she went right up to the queen, who bent and, taking the crown, placed it on her own head. Then a wonderful thing happened. Her tail dropped away, or rather, it divided and grew into 2 legs and a pair of the prettiest feet in the world, while her maidens, who were grouped around her, shed their scales and became girls again. They all turned and looked at each other first, and next at the little fish who had regained her own shape and was more beautiful than any of them. "It is you who have given us back our life. You," they cried, and fell to weeping from very joy. So they all went back to earth and the queen's palace, and quite forgot the one that lay under the sea. But they had been so long away that they found many changes. The prince, the queen's husband, had died some years since, and in his place was her son, who had grown up and was king. Even in his joy at seeing his mother again, an air of sadness clung to him, and at last the queen could bear it no longer, and begged him to walk with her in the garden. Seated together in a bower of jessamine, where she had passed long hours as a bride, she took her son's hand and entreated him to tell her the cause of his sorrow. "For," said she, "if I can give you happiness, you shall have it." "It is no use," answered the prince. "Nobody can help me. I must bear it alone." "But at least let me share your grief," urged the queen. "No one can do that," said he. "I have fallen in love with what I can never marry, and I must get on as best I can." "It may not be as impossible as you think," answered the queen. "At any rate, tell me." There was silence between them for a moment. Then, turning away his head, the prince answered gently, "I have fallen in love with a beautiful deer." "Ah, if that is all," exclaimed the queen joyfully, and she told him in broken words that, as he had guessed, it was no deer but an enchanted maiden who had won back the crown and brought her home to her own people. "She is here in my palace," added the queen. "I will take you to her." But when the prince stood before the girl, who was so much more beautiful than anything he had ever dreamed of, he lost all his courage and stood with bent head before her. Then the maiden drew near, and her eyes, as she looked at him, were the eyes of the deer that day in the forest. She whispered softly, "By your favor let me go, and do not kill me." And the prince remembered her words, and his heart was filled with happiness. And the queen, his mother, watched them and smiled. Once upon a time, in a savage country where the snow lies deep for many months in the year, there lived an owl and an eagle. Though they were so different in many ways, they became great friends, and at length set up house together, one passing the day in hunting and the other the night. In this manner they did not see very much of each other, and perhaps agreed all the better for that. But at any rate they were perfectly happy, and only wanted one thing, or rather 2 things, and that was a wife for each. "I really am too tired when I come home in the evening to clean up the house," said the eagle, "and I am much too sleepy at dawn after a long night's hunting to begin to sweep and dust," answered the owl. And they both made up their minds that wives they must have. They flew about in their spare moments to the young ladies of their acquaintance, but the girls all declared they preferred one husband to 2. The poor birds began to despair, when one evening, after they had been for a wonder hunting together, they found two sisters fast asleep on their two beds. The eagle looked at the owl, and the owl looked at the eagle. "They will make capital wives if they will only stay with us," said they. And they flew off to give themselves a wash and to make themselves smart before the girls awoke. For many hours the sisters slept on, for they had come a long way from a town where there was scarcely anything to eat, and felt weak and tired. But by and by they opened their eyes and saw the two birds watching them. "I hope you are rested?" asked the owl politely. "Oh yes, thank you," answered the girls. "Only we are so very hungry. Do you think we could have something to eat?" "Certainly," replied the eagle. And he flew away to a farmhouse a mile or two off, and brought back a nest of eggs in his strong beak, while the owl, catching up a tin pot, went to a cottage where lived an old woman and her cow, and entering the shed by the window, dipped the pot into the pail of new milk that stood there. The girls were so much delighted with the kindness and cleverness of their hosts that, when the birds inquired if they would marry them and stay there forever, they accepted without so much as giving it a second thought. So the eagle took the younger sister to wife, and the owl the elder, and never was a home more peaceful than theirs. All went well for several months, and then the eagle's wife had a son, while, on the same day, the owl's wife gave birth to a frog, which she placed directly on the banks of a stream nearby, as he did not seem to like the house. The children both grew quickly, and were never tired of playing together, or wanted any other companions. One night in the spring, when the ice had melted and the snow was gone, the sisters sat spinning in the house, awaiting their husband's return. But long though they watched, neither the owl nor the eagle ever came, neither that day nor the next, nor the next, nor the next. At last the wives gave up all hope of their return, but, being sensible women, they did not sit down and cry, but called their children, and set out, determined to seek the whole world over till the missing husbands were found. Now the women had no idea in which direction the lost birds had gone, but they knew that some distance off was a thick forest, where good hunting was to be found. It seemed a likely place to find them, or at any rate they might hear something of them, and they walked quickly on, cheered by the thought that they were doing something. Suddenly the younger sister, who was a little in front, gave a cry of surprise. "Oh, look at that lake," she said. "We shall never get across it." "Yes, we shall," answered the elder. "I know what to do." And taking a long piece of string from her pocket, fastened it into the frog's mouth like a bit. "You must swim across the lake," she said, stooping to put him in, "and we will walk across on the line behind you." And so they did, till they got to about the middle of the lake, when the frog boy stopped. "I don't like it, and I won't go any further," cried he sulkily. And his mother had to promise him all sorts of nice things before he would go on again. When at last they reached the other side, the owl's wife untied the line from the frog's mouth and told him he might rest and play by the lake till they got back from the forest. Then she and her sister and the boy walked on, with the great forest looming before them. But they had by this time come far and were very tired, and felt glad enough to see some smoke curling up from a little hut in front of them. "Let us go in and ask for some water," said the eagle's wife, and in they went. The inside of the hut was so dark that at first they could see nothing at all, but presently they heard a feeble croak from one corner. But sisters turned to look, and there, tied by wings and feet, and their eyes sunken, were the husbands that they sought. Quick as lightning the wives cut the deer thongs which bound them, but the poor birds were too weak from pain and starvation to do more than utter soft sounds of joy. Hardly, however, were they set free than a voice of thunder made the two sisters jump, while the little boy clung tightly round his mother's neck. "What are you doing in my house?" cried she, and the wives answered boldly that now they had found their husbands they meant to save them from such a wicked witch. "Well, I will give you your chance," answered the ogress with a hideous grin. "We will see if you can slide down this mountain. If you can reach the bottom of the cavern, you shall have your husbands back again." And as she spoke, she pushed them before her out of the door to the edge of a precipice, which went straight down several hundreds of feet. Unseen by the witch, the frog's mother fastened one end of the magic line about her, and whispered to the little boy to hold fast the other. She had scarcely done so when the witch turned round. "You don't seem to like your bargain," said she, but the girl answered, "Oh, yes, I am quite ready. I was only waiting for you." And sitting down she began her slide. On she went, down to such a depth that even the witch's eyes could not follow her. But she took for granted that the woman was dead, and told the sister to take her place. At that instant, however, the head of the elder appeared above the rock, brought upwards by the magic line. The witch gave a howl of disgust and hid her face in her hands, thus giving the younger sister time to fasten the cord to her waist before the ogress looked up. "You can't expect such luck twice," she said, and the girl sat down and slid over the edge. But in a few minutes she too was back again, and the witch saw that she had failed, and feared lest her power was going. Trembling with rage though she was, she dared not show it, and only laughed hideously. "I shan't let my prisoners go as easily as all that," she said. "Make my hair grow as thick and as black as yours, or else your husbands shall never see daylight again." "That is quite simple," replied the elder sister. "Only you must do as we did, and perhaps you won't like the treatment." "If you can bear it, of course I can," answered the witch. And so the girls told her they had first smeared their heads with pitch, and then laid hot stones upon them. "It is very painful," said they, "but there is no other way that we know of. And in order to make sure that all will go right, one of us will hold you down while the other pours on the pitch." And so they did, and the elder sister let down her hair till it hung over the witch's eyes, so that she might believe it was her own hair growing. Then the other brought a huge stone, and, in short, there was an end of the witch. The sisters were savages who had never seen a missionary. So when the sisters saw that she was dead, they went to the hut and nursed their husbands till they grew strong. Then they picked up the frog, and all went to make another home on the other side of the great lake. No one intended to leave Martha alone that afternoon, but it happened that everyone was called away for one reason or another. Mrs. McFarland was attending the weekly card party held by the Women's Anti-Gambling League. Sister Nell's young man had called quite unexpectedly to take her for a long drive. Papa was at the office as usual. It was Mary Ann's day out. As for Emmeline, she certainly should have stayed in the house and looked after the little girl, but Emmeline had a restless nature. "Would you mind, miss, if I just crossed the alley to speak a word to Mrs. Carleton's girl?" she asked Martha. "Course not," replied the child. "You'd better lock the back door, though, and take the key, for I shall be upstairs." "Oh, I'll do that, of course, miss," said the delighted maid, and ran away to spend the afternoon with her friend, leaving Martha quite alone in the big house and locked into the bargain. The little girl read a few pages in her new book, sewed a few stitches in her embroidery, and started to play visiting with her 4 favorite dolls. Then she remembered that in the attic was a doll's playhouse that hadn't been used for months, so she decided she would dust it and put it in order. Filled with this idea, the girl climbed the winding stairs to the big room under the roof. It was well lighted by 3 dormer windows and was warm and pleasant. Around the walls were rows of boxes and trunks, piles of old carpeting, pieces of damaged furniture, bundles of discarded clothing, and other odds and ends of more or less value. Every well-regulated house has an attic of this sort, so I need not describe it. The doll's house had been moved, but after a search Martha found it away over in a corner near the big chimney. She drew it out and noticed that behind it was a black wooden chest which Uncle Walter had sent over from Italy years and years ago, before Martha was born, in fact. Mamma had told her about it one day, how there was no key to it, because Uncle Walter wished it to remain unopened until he returned home, and how this wandering uncle, who was a mighty hunter, had gone into Africa to hunt elephants and had never been heard from afterwards. The little girl looked at the chest curiously, now that it had by accident attracted her attention. It was quite big, bigger even than Mamma's traveling trunk, and was studded all over with tarnished brass-headed nails. It was heavy, too, for when Martha tried to lift one end of it, she found she could not stir it a bit. But there was a place in the side of the cover for a key. She stooped to examine the lock, and saw that it would take a rather big key to open it. Then, as you may suspect, the little girl longed to open Uncle Walter's big box and see what was in it. For we are all curious, and little girls are just as curious as the rest of us. "I don't believe Uncle Walter'll ever come back," she thought. "Papa said once that some elephant must have killed him. If I only had a key." She stopped and clapped her little hands together gaily as she remembered a big basket of keys on the shelf in the linen closet. They were of all sorts and sizes. Perhaps one of them would unlock the mysterious chest. She flew down the stairs, found the basket, and returned with it to the attic. Then she sat down before the brass-studded box and began trying one key after another in the curious old lock. Some were too large, but most were too small. One would go into the lock, but would not turn. Another stuck so fast that she feared for a time that she would never get it out again. But at last, when the basket was almost empty, an oddly shaped ancient brass key slipped easily into the lock. With a cry of joy, Martha turned the key with both hands. Then she heard a sharp click, and the next moment the heavy lid flew up of its own accord. The little girl leaned over the edge of the chest an instant, and the sight that met her eyes caused her to start back in amazement. Slowly and carefully, a man unpacked himself from the chest, stepped out upon the floor, stretched his limbs, and then took off his hat and bowed politely to the astonished child. He was tall and thin, and his face seemed badly tanned or sunburnt. Then another man emerged from the chest, yawning and rubbing his eyes like a sleepy schoolboy. He was of middle size, and his skin seemed as badly tanned as that of the first. While Martha stared open-mouthed at the remarkable sight, a third man crawled from the chest. He had the same complexion as his fellows, but was short and fat. All three were dressed in a curious manner. They wore short jackets of red velvet braided with gold, and knee breeches of sky-blue satin with silver buttons. Over their stockings were laced wide ribbons of red and yellow and blue, while their hats had broad brims with high peaked crowns, from which fluttered yards of bright-colored ribbons. They had big gold rings in their ears and rows of knives and pistols in their belts. Their eyes were black and glittering, and they wore long, fierce mustaches, curling at the ends like a pig's tail. "My, but you were heavy!" exclaimed the fat one, when he had pulled down his velvet jacket and brushed the dust from his sky-blue breeches. "And you squeezed me all out of shape." "It was unavoidable, Luigi," responded the thin man lightly. "The lid of the chest pressed me down upon you, yet I tender you my regrets." "As for me," said the middle-sized man, carelessly rolling a cigarette and lighting it, "you must acknowledge I have been your nearest friend for years, so do not be disagreeable." "You mustn't smoke in the attic," said Martha, recovering herself at sight of the cigarette. "You might set the house on fire." The middle-sized man, who had not noticed her before, at this speech turned to the girl and bowed. "Since a lady requests it," said he, "I shall abandon my cigarette," and he threw it on the floor and extinguished it with his foot. "Who are you?" asked Martha, who until now had been too astonished to be frightened. "Permit us to introduce ourselves," said the thin man, flourishing his hat gracefully. "This is Luigi." The fat man nodded. "And this is Benny." The middle-sized man bowed. "And I am Victor. We are 3 bandits, Italian bandits. Bandits! Cried Martha, with a look of horror. Exactly. Perhaps in all the world there are not 3 other bandits so terrible and fierce as ourselves, said Victor proudly. 'Tis so, said the fat man, nodding gravely. But it's wicked, exclaimed Martha. Yes, indeed, replied Victor. We are extremely and tremendously wicked. Perhaps in all the world you could not find 3 men more wicked than those who now stand before you. 'Tis so, said the fat man approvingly. But you shouldn't be so wicked, said the girl. It's naughty. Victor cast down his eyes and blushed. Naughty, gasped Benny with a horrified look. 'Tis a hard word, said Luigi sadly, and buried his face in his hands. I little thought, murmured Victor in a voice broken by emotion, ever to be so reviled, and by a lady. Yet perhaps you spoke thoughtlessly. You must consider, miss, that our wickedness has an excuse. For how are we to be bandits, let me ask, unless we are wicked? Martha was puzzled and shook her head thoughtfully. Then she remembered something. You can't remain bandits any longer, said she, because you are now in America. America, cried the 3 together. Certainly. You are on Prairie Avenue in Chicago. Uncle Walter sent you here from Italy in this chest. The bandits seemed greatly bewildered by this announcement. Luigi sat down on an old chair with a broken rocker and wiped his forehead with a yellow silk handkerchief. Benny and Victor fell back upon the chest and looked at her with pale faces and staring eyes. When he had somewhat recovered himself, Victor spoke. Your Uncle Walter has greatly wronged us, he said reproachfully. He has taken us from our beloved Italy, where bandits are highly respected, and brought us to a strange country where we shall not know whom to rob or how much to ask for a ransom. 'Tis so, said the fat man, slapping his leg sharply. And we had won such fine reputations in Italy, said Benny regretfully. Perhaps Uncle Walter wanted to reform you, suggested Martha. Are there, then, no bandits in Chicago? Asked Victor. Well, replied the girl, blushing in her turn, we do not call them bandits. Then what shall we do for a living? Inquired Benny despairingly. A great deal can be done in a big American city, said the child. My father is a lawyer. The bandits shuddered. And my mother's cousin is a police inspector. Ah, said Victor, that is a good employment. The police need to be inspected, especially in Italy. Everywhere, added Benny. Then you could do other things, continued Martha encouragingly. You could be motormen on trolley cars or clerks in a department store. Some people even become aldermen to earn a living. The bandits shook their heads sadly. We are not fitted for such work, said Victor. Our business is to rob. Martha tried to think. It is rather hard to get positions in the gas office, she said, but you might become politicians. No, cried Benny with sudden fierceness. We must not abandon our high calling. Bandits we have always been, and bandits we must remain." "'Tis so," agreed the fat man. "Even in Chicago there must be people to rob," remarked Victor with cheerfulness. Martha was distressed. "I think they have all been robbed," she objected. "Then we can rob the robbers, for we have experience and talent beyond the ordinary," said Benny. Oh dear," moaned the girl. "Why did Uncle Walter ever send you here in this chest?" The bandits became interested. "That is what we should like to know," declared Victor eagerly. "But no one will ever know, for Uncle Walter was lost while hunting elephants in Africa," she continued with conviction. "Then we must accept our fate and rob to the best of our ability," said Victor. "So long as we are faithful to our beloved profession, we need not be ashamed." "'Tis so," cried the fat man. "Brothers, we will begin now. Let us rob the house we are in." "Good!" shouted the others, and sprang to their feet. Benny turned threateningly upon the child. "Remain here," he commanded. "If you stir one step, your blood will be on your own head." Then he added in a gentler voice, "Don't be afraid, that's the way all bandits talk to their captives. But of course, we wouldn't hurt a young lady under any circumstances." "Of course not," said Victor. The fat man drew a big knife from his belt and flourished it about his head. "S'blood!" he ejaculated fiercely. "S'bananas!" cried Benny in a terrible voice. "Confusion to our foes!" hissed Victor. And then the three bent themselves nearly double and crept stealthily down the stairway with cocked pistols in their hands and glittering knives between their teeth, leaving Martha trembling with fear and too horrified to even cry for help. How long she remained alone in the attic she never knew. But finally she heard the cat-like tread of the returning bandits and saw them coming up the stairs in single file. All bore heavy loads of plunder in their arms, and Lugui was balancing a mince pie on the top of a pile of her mother's best evening dresses. Victor came next with an armful of bric-a-brac, a brass candelabra, and the parlor clock. Benny had the family Bible, the basket of silverware from the sideboard, a copper kettle, and Papa's fur overcoat. "Oh, joy," said Victor, putting down his load. "It is pleasant to rob once more." "Oh, ecstasy," said Benny. But he let the kettle drop on his toe and immediately began dancing around in anguish, while he muttered queer words in the Italian language. "We have much wealth," continued Victor, holding the mince pie while Lugui added his spoils to the heap. "And all from one house. This America must be a rich place." With a dagger he then cut himself a piece of the pie and handed the remainder to his comrades. Whereupon all three sat upon the floor and consumed the pie while Martha looked on sadly. "We should have a cave," remarked Benny, "for we must store our plunder in a safe place. Can you tell us of a secret cave?" he asked Martha. "There's a mammoth cave," she answered, "but it's in Kentucky." You would be obliged to ride on the cars a long time to get there." The three bandits looked thoughtful and munched their pie silently, but the next moment they were startled by the ringing of the electric doorbell, which was heard plainly even in the remote attic. "What's that?" demanded Victor in a hoarse voice, as the three scrambled to their feet with drawn daggers. Martha ran to the window and saw it was only the postman, who had dropped a letter in the box and gone away again. But the incident gave her an idea of how to get rid of her troublesome bandits, so she began wringing her hands as if in great distress and cried out, "It's the police!" The robbers looked at one another with genuine alarm, and Loogie asked tremblingly, "Are there many of them?" 112, exclaimed Martha after pretending to count them. "Then we are lost," declared Benny, "for we could never fight so many and live." "Are they armed?" inquired Victor, who was shivering as if cold. "Oh, yes," said she. "They have guns and swords and pistols and axes and— "And what?" demanded Lugui. "And cannons." The three wicked ones groaned aloud, and Benny said in a hollow voice, "I hope they will kill us quickly and not put us to the torture. I have been told these Americans are painted Indians, who are bloodthirsty and terrible." "'Tis so," gasped the fat man with a shudder. Suddenly Martha turned from the window. "You are my friends, are you not?" she asked. "We are devoted," answered Victor. "We adore you," cried Benny. "We would die for you," added Lugui, thinking he was about to die anyway. "Then I will save you," said the girl. "How?" asked the three with one voice. "Get back into the chest," she said. "I will then close the lid so they will be unable to find you." They looked around the room in a dazed and irresolute way, but she exclaimed, "You must be quick. They will soon be here to arrest you." Then Lugai sprang into the chest and lay flat upon the bottom. Benny tumbled in next and packed himself in the backside. Victor followed after pausing to kiss her hand to the girl in a graceful manner. Then Martha ran up to press down the lid, but could not make it catch. "You must squeeze down," she said to them. Lugui groaned. "I am doing my best, miss," said Victor, who was nearest the top. "But although we fitted in very nicely before, the chest now seems rather small for us." "'Tis so," came the muffled voice of the fat man from the bottom. "I know what takes up the room," said Benny. "What?" inquired Victor anxiously. "The pie," returned Benny. "'Tis so," came from the bottom, in faint accents. Then Martha sat upon the lid and pressed it down with all her weight. To her great delight the lock caught, and springing down, she exerted all her strength and turned the key. This story should teach us not to interfere in matters that do not concern us. For had Martha refrained from opening Uncle Walter's mysterious chest, she would not have been obliged to carry downstairs all the plunder the robbers had brought into the attic. An accomplished wizard once lived on the top floor of a tenement house and passed his time in thoughtful study and studious thought. What he didn't know about wizardry was hardly worth knowing, for he possessed all the books and recipes of all the wizards who had lived before him, and moreover, he had invented several wizardments himself. This admirable person would have been completely happy, but for the numerous interruptions to his studies caused by folk who came to consult him about their troubles, in which he was not interested, and by the loud knocks of the iceman, the milkman, the baker's boy, the laundryman, and the peanut woman. He never dealt with any of these people, but they rapped at his door every day to see him about this or that, or to try to sell him their wares. Just when he was most deeply interested in his books or engaged in watching the bubbling of a cauldron, there would come a knock at his door, and after sending the intruder away, he always found he had lost his train of thought or ruined his compound. At length these interruptions aroused his anger, and he decided he must have a dog to keep people away from his door. He didn't know where to find a dog, but in the next room lived a poor glass blower with whom he had a slight acquaintance. So he went into the man's apartment and asked, "Where can I find a dog?" "What sort of a dog?" inquired the glass blower. "A good dog, one that will bark at people and drive them away, one that will be no trouble to keep and won't expect to be fed, one that has no fleas and is neat in his habits, one that will obey me when I speak to him. In short, a good dog," said the wizard. "Such a dog is hard to find," returned the glass blower, who was busy making a blue glass flower pot with a pink glass rose bush in it, having green glass leaves and yellow glass roses. The wizard watched him thoughtfully. "Why cannot you blow me a dog out of glass?" he asked presently. "I can," declared the glass blower, "but it would not bark at people, you know." "Oh, I'll fix that easily enough," replied the other. "If I could not make a glass dog bark, I would be a mighty poor wizard." "Very well. If you can use a glass dog, I'll be pleased to blow one for you. Only you must pay for my work." "Certainly," agreed the wizard. "But I have none of that horrid stuff you call money. You must take some of my wares in exchange." The glass blower considered the matter for a moment. "Could you give me something to cure my rheumatism?" he asked. "Oh, yes, easily." "Then it's a bargain. I'll start the dog at once. What color of glass shall I use?" "Pink is a pretty color," said the wizard. "And it's unusual for a dog, isn't it?" "Very," answered the glass blower, "but it shall be pink." So the wizard went back to his studies, and the glass blower began to make the dog. Next morning he entered the wizard's room with the glass dog under his arm and set it carefully upon the table. It was a beautiful pink in color, with a fine coat of spun glass, and about its neck was twisted a blue glass ribbon. Its eyes were specks of black glass and sparkled intelligently, as do many of the glass eyes worn by men. The wizard expressed himself pleased with the glass blower's skill, and at once handed him a small vial. "This will cure your rheumatism," he said. "But the vial is empty," protested the glass blower. "Oh no, there is one drop of liquid in it," was the wizard's reply. "Will one drop cure my rheumatism?" inquired the glass blower in wonder. "Most certainly. That is a marvelous remedy. The one drop contained in the vial will cure instantly any kind of disease ever known to humanity. Therefore it is especially good for rheumatism. But guard it well, for it is the only drop of its kind in the world, and I've forgotten the recipe." "Thank you," said the glass blower, and went back to his room. Then the wizard cast a wizzy spell and mumbled several very learned words in the wizardese language over the glass dog, whereupon the little animal first wagged its tail from side to side, then winked his left eye knowingly, and at last began barking in a most frightful manner. That is, when you stop to consider the noise came from a pink glass dog. There is something almost astonishing in the magic arts of wizards, unless, of course, you know how to do the things yourself, when you are not expected to be surprised at them. The wizard was as delighted as a school teacher at the success of his spell, although he was not astonished. Immediately he placed the dog outside his door, where it would bark at anyone who dared knock and so disturb the studies of its master. The glass blower, on returning to his room, decided not to use the one drop of wizard cure-all just then. "My rheumatism is better today," he reflected, "and I will be wise to save the medicine for a time when I am very ill, when it will be of more service to me." So he placed the vial in his cupboard and went to work blowing more roses out of glass. Presently he happened to think the medicine might not keep, so he started to ask the wizard about it. But when he reached the door, the glass dog barked so fiercely that he dared not knock, and returned in great haste to his own room. Indeed, the poor man was quite upset at so unfriendly a reception from the dog he had himself so carefully and skillfully made. The next morning, as he read his newspaper, he noticed an article stating that the beautiful Miss Midas, the richest young lady in town, was very ill, and the doctors had given up hope of her recovery. The glass blower, although miserably poor, hard-working, and homely of feature, was a man of ideas. He suddenly recollected his precious medicine, and determined to use it to better advantage than relieving his own ills. He dressed himself in his best clothes, brushed his hair and combed his whiskers, washed his hands and tied his necktie, blackened his shoes and sponged his vest, and then put the vial of magic cure-all in his pocket. Next he locked his door, went downstairs and walked through the streets to the grand mansion where the wealthy Miss Midas resided. The butler opened the door and said, "No soap, no chromos, no vegetables, no hair oil, no books, no baking powder. My young lady is dying, and we're well supplied for the funeral." The glass blower was grieved at being taken for a peddler. "My friend," he began proudly, But the butler interrupted him, saying, "No tombstones either. There's a family graveyard and the monument's built." "The graveyard won't be needed if you will permit me to speak," said the glass blower. "No doctors, sir. They've given up my young lady, and she's given up the doctors," continued the butler calmly. "I'm no doctor," returned the glass blower, "nor are the others. But what is your errand?" "I called to cure your young lady by means of a magical compound." "Step in, please, and take a seat in the hall. I'll speak to the housekeeper," said the butler more politely. So he spoke to the housekeeper, and the housekeeper mentioned the matter to the steward, and the steward consulted the chef, and the chef kissed the lady's maid and sent her to see the stranger. Thus are the very wealthy hedged around with ceremony, even when dying. When the lady's maid heard from the glass blower that he had a medicine which would cure her mistress, she said, "I'm glad you came." "But," said he, "if I restore your mistress to health, she must marry me." "I'll make inquiries and see if she's willing," answered the maid, and went at once to consult Miss Midas. The young lady did not hesitate an instant. "I'd marry any old thing rather than die," she cried. "Bring him here at once." So the glass blower came, poured the magic drop into a little water, gave it to the patient, and the next minute Miss Midas was as well as she had ever been in her life. "Dear me," she exclaimed, "I've an engagement at the Fritters' reception tonight. Bring my pearl-colored silk, Marie, and I will begin my toilet at once. And don't forget to cancel the order for the funeral flowers and your mourning gown." "But Miss Midas," remonstrated the glass blower, who stood by, "you promised to marry me if I cured you." "I know," said the young lady, "but we must have time to make proper announcement in the society papers and have the wedding cards engraved. Call tomorrow and we'll talk it over." The glass blower had not impressed her favorably as a husband, and she was glad to find an excuse for getting rid of him for a time, and she did not want to miss the Fritters' reception. Yet the man went home filled with joy, for he thought his stratagem had succeeded, and he was about to marry a rich wife who would keep him in luxury forever afterward. The first thing he did on reaching his room was to smash his glass-blowing tools and throw them out of the window. He then sat down to figure out ways of spending his wife's money. The following day he called upon Miss Midas, who was reading a novel and eating chocolate creams as happily as if she had never been ill in her life. "Where did you get the magic compound that cured me?" she asked. "From a learned wizard," said he. And then, thinking it would interest her, he told how he had made the glass dog for the wizard, and how it barked and kept everybody from bothering him. "How delightful," she said. "I've always wanted a glass dog that could bark." "But there is only one in the world," he answered, "and it belongs to the wizard." "You must buy it for me," said the lady. "The wizard cares nothing for money," replied the glass blower. "Then you must steal it for me," she retorted. I can never live happily another day unless I have a glass dog that can bark." The glass blower was much distressed at this, but said he would see what he could do. For a man should always try to please his wife, and Miss Midas has promised to marry him within a week. On his way home he purchased a heavy sack, and when he passed the wizard's door and the pink glass dog ran out to bark at him, he threw the sack over the dog, tied the opening with a piece of twine, and carried him away to his own room. The next day he sent the sack by a messenger boy to Miss Midas with his compliments, and later in the afternoon he called upon her in person, feeling quite sure he would be received with gratitude for stealing the dog she so greatly desired. But when he came to the door and the butler opened it, what was his amazement to see the glass dog rush out and begin barking at him furiously. "Call off your dog!" he shouted in terror. "I can't, sir," answered the butler. "My young lady has ordered the glass dog to bark whenever you call here." "You'd better look out, sir," he added, "for if it bites you, you may have glassophobia." This so frightened the poor glass blower that he went away hurriedly. But he stopped at a drugstore and put his last dime in the telephone box so he could talk to Miss Midas without being bitten by the dog. "Give me Pelf 6742, he called. "Hello? What is it?" said a voice. "I want to speak with Miss Midas," said the glass blower. Presently a sweet voice said, "This is Miss Midas. What is it?" "Why have you treated me so cruelly and set the glass dog on me?" asked the poor fellow. "Well, to tell the truth," said the lady, "I don't like your looks. Your cheeks are pale and baggy, your hair is coarse and long, your eyes are small and red, your hands are big and rough, and you are bow-legged." "But I can't help my looks," pleaded the glass blower, "and you really promised to marry me." "If you were better looking, I'd keep my promise," she returned. "But under the circumstances, you are no fit mate for me, and unless you keep away from my mansion, I shall set my glass dog on you." Then she dropped the phone and would have nothing more to say. The miserable glass blower went home with a heart bursting with disappointment, and began tying a rope to the bedpost by which to hang himself. Someone knocked at the door, and upon opening it, he saw the wizard. "I've lost my dog," he announced. "Have you indeed?" replied the glass blower, tying a knot in the rope. "Yes, someone has stolen him." "That's too bad," declared the glass blower indifferently. "You must make me another," said the wizard. "But I cannot. I've thrown away my tools." "Then what shall I do?" asked the wizard. "I do not know, unless you offer a reward for the dog." "But I have no money," said the wizard. "Offer some of your compounds, then," suggested the glass blower, who was making a noose in the rope for his head to go through. "The only thing I can spare," replied the wizard thoughtfully, "is a beauty powder." "What?" cried the glass blower, throwing down the rope. "Have you really such a thing?" "Yes, indeed." Whoever takes the powder will become the most beautiful person in the world. If you will offer that as a reward," said the glass blower eagerly, "I'll try to find the dog for you. For above everything else, I long to be beautiful. But I warn you the beauty will only be skin deep," said the wizard. "That's all right," replied the happy glass blower. "When I lose my skin, I shan't care to remain beautiful." "Then tell me where to find my dog, and you shall have the powder," promised the wizard. So the glass blower went out and pretended to search, and by he returned and said, "I've discovered the dog. You will find him in the mansion of Miss Midas." The wizard went at once to see if this were true, and, sure enough, the glass dog ran out and began barking at him. Then the wizard spread out his hands and chanted a magic spell which sent the dog fast asleep, when he picked him up and carried him to his own room on the top floor of the tenement house. Afterward he carried the beauty powder to the glass blower as a reward, and the fellow immediately swallowed it and became the most beautiful man in the world. The next time he called upon Miss Midas, there was no dog to bark at him, and when the young lady saw him, she fell in love with his beauty at once. "If only you were a count or a prince," she sighed, "I'd willingly marry you." "But I am a prince," he answered, "the prince of dog blowers." "Ah," said she, "then if you are willing to accept an allowance of $4 a week, I'll order the wedding cards engraved." The man hesitated, but when he thought of the rope hanging from his bedpost, he consented to the terms. So they were married, and the bride was very jealous of her husband's beauty and led him a dog's life. So he managed to get into debt and made her miserable in turn. As for the glass dog, the wizard set him barking again by means of his wizardness and put him outside his door. I suppose he is there yet, and am rather sorry, for I should like to consult the wizard about the moral to this story. A king once died, as kings are apt to do, being as liable to shortness of breath as other mortals. It was high time this king abandoned his earth life, for he had lived in a sadly extravagant manner, and his subjects could spare him without the slightest inconvenience. His father had left him a full treasury, both money and jewels being in abundance. But the foolish king just deceased had squandered every penny in riotous living. He had then taxed his subjects until most of them became paupers, and this money vanished in more riotous living. Next he sold all the grand old furniture in the palace, all the silver and gold plate and bric-a-brac, all the rich carpets and furnishings, and even his own kingly wardrobe, reserving only a soiled and moth-eaten ermine robe to fold over his threadbare raiment. And he spent the money in further riotous living. Don't ask me to explain what riotous living is. I only know from hearsay that it is an excellent way to get rid of money. And so this spendthrift king found it. He now picked all the magnificent jewels from this kingly crown, and from the round ball on the top of his scepter, and sold them and spent the money. Riotous living, of course. But at last he was at the end of his resources. He couldn't sell the crown itself because no one but the king had the right to wear it. Neither could he sell the royal palace because only the king had the right to live there. So, finally, he found himself reduced to a bare palace, containing only a big mahogany bedstead that he slept in, a small stool on which he sat to pull off his shoes, and the moth-eaten ermine robe. In this strait he was reduced to the necessity of borrowing an occasional dime from his chief counselor, with which to buy a ham sandwich. And the chief counselor hadn't many dimes. One who counseled his king so foolishly was likely to ruin his own prospects as well. So the king, having nothing more to live for, died suddenly and left a 10-year-old son to inherit the dismantled kingdom, the moth-eaten robe, and the jewel-stripped crown. No one envied the child, who had scarcely been thought of until he became king himself. Then he was recognized as a personage of some importance, and the politicians and hangers-on, headed by the chief counselor of the kingdom, held a meeting to determine what could be done for him. These folk had helped the old king to live riotously while his money lasted, and now they were poor and too proud to work. So they tried to think of a plan that would bring more money into the little king's treasury, where it would be handy for them to help themselves. After the meeting was over, the chief counselor came to the young king, who was playing peg-top in the courtyard, and said, "Your Majesty, we have thought of a way to restore your kingdom to its former power and magnificence." "All right," replied His Majesty carelessly. "How will you do it?" "By marrying you to a lady of great wealth," replied the counselor. "Marrying me?" cried the king. "Why, I am only 10 years old." "I know, it is to be regretted, but your Majesty will grow older, and the affairs of the kingdom demand that you marry a wife. Can't I marry a mother instead?" asked the poor little king, who had lost his mother when a baby. "Certainly not," declared the counselor. "To marry a mother would be illegal. To marry a wife is right and proper." "Can't you marry her yourself?" inquired His Majesty, aiming his peg-top at the chief counselor's toe, and laughing to see how he jumped to escape it. "Let me explain," said the other. "You haven't a penny in the world, but you have a kingdom. There are many rich women who would be glad to give their wealth in exchange for a queen's coronet, even if the king is but a child. So we have decided to advertise that the one who bids the highest shall become the Queen of Quok." "If I must marry at all," said the king after a moment's thought, "I prefer to marry Nyana, the armorer's daughter." "She is too poor," replied the counselor. "Her teeth are pearls, her eyes are amethysts, and her hair is gold," declared the little king. "True, your Majesty, but consider that your wife's wealth must be used. How would Nyana look after you have pulled her teeth of pearls, plucked out her amethyst eyes, and shaved her golden head?" The boy shuddered. "Have your own way," he said despairingly. "Only let the lady be as dainty as possible and a good playfellow." "We shall do our best," returned the chief counselor, and went away to advertise throughout the neighboring kingdoms for a wife for the boy king of Quoc. There were so many applicants for the privilege of marrying the little king that it was decided to put him up at auction, in order that the largest possible sum of money should be brought into the kingdom. So, on the day appointed, the ladies gathered at the palace from all the surrounding kingdoms, from Bilcon, Mulgravia, Junkum, and even as far away as the Republic of Macvelt. The chief counselor came to the palace early in the morning and had the king's face washed and his hair combed, and then he padded the inside of the crown with old newspapers to make it small enough to fit his majesty's head. It was a sorry-looking crown, having many big and little holes in it where the jewels had once been, and it had been neglected and knocked around until it was quite battered and tarnished. Yet, as the counselor said, it was the king's crown, and it was quite proper he should wear it on the solemn occasion of his auction. Like all boys, be they kings or paupers, His Majesty had torn and soiled his one suit of clothes, so that they were hardly presentable, and there was no money to buy new ones. Therefore the counselor wound the old ermine robe around the king and sat him upon the stool in the middle of the otherwise empty audience chamber. And around him stood all the courtiers and politicians and hangers-on of the kingdom, consisting of such people as were too proud or lazy to work for a living. There was a great number of them, you may be sure, and they made an imposing appearance. Then the doors of the audience chamber were thrown open, and the wealthy ladies who aspired to being Queen of Quoc came trooping in. The king looked them over with much anxiety and decided they were each and all old enough to be his grandmother, and ugly enough to scare away the crows from the royal cornfields. After which he lost interest in them. But the rich ladies never looked at the poor little king squatting upon his stool. They gathered at once about the chief counselor, who acted as auctioneer. "How much am I offered for the coronet of the Queen of Quoc?" asked the counselor in a loud voice. "Where is the coronet?" inquired a fussy old lady who had just buried her 9th husband and was worth several millions. "There isn't any coronet at present," explained the chief counselor, "but whoever bids highest will have the right to wear one, and she can then buy it." "Oh," said the fussy old lady, "I see." Then she added, "I'll bid $14. $14,000, cried a sour-looking woman who was thin and tall and had wrinkles all over her skin. Like a frosted apple, the king thought. The bidding now became fast and furious, and the poverty-stricken courtiers brightened up as the sum began to mount into the millions. "He'll bring us a very pretty fortune after all," whispered one to his comrade, "and then we shall have the pleasure of helping him spend it." The king began to be anxious. All the women who looked at all kind-hearted or pleasant had stopped bidding for lack of money, and the slender old dame with the wrinkles seemed determined to get the coronet at any price, and with it the boy husband. This ancient creature finally became so excited that her wig got crosswise of her head and her false teeth kept slipping out, which horrified the little king greatly, but she would not give up. At last the chief counselor ended the auction by crying out, "Sold to Marianne Brzezinski de la Porcus for $3,900,624.16. And the sour-looking old woman paid the money in cash and on the spot, which proves this is a fairy story. The king was so disturbed at the thought that he must marry this hideous creature that he began to wail and weep, whereupon the woman boxed his ears soundly. But the counselor reproved her for punishing her future husband in public, saying, "You are not married yet. Wait until tomorrow, after the wedding takes place. Then you can abuse him as much as you wish. But at present we prefer to have people think this is a love match." The poor king slept but little that night, so filled was he with terror of his future wife. Nor could he get the idea out of his head that he preferred to marry the armorer's daughter, who was about his own age. He tossed and tumbled around upon his hard bed until the moonlight came in at the window and lay like a great white sheet upon the bare floor. Finally, in turning over for the 100th time, his hand struck against a secret spring in the headboard of the big mahogany bedstead, and at once, with a sharp click, a panel flew open. The noise caused the king to look up, and seeing the open panel, he stood upon tiptoe and, reaching within, drew out a folded paper. It had several leaves fastened together like a book, and upon the first page was written, "When the king is in trouble, this leaf he must double and set it on fire to obtain his desire." This was not very good poetry, but when the king had spelled it out in the moonlight, he was filled with joy. "There's no doubt about my being in trouble," he exclaimed, "so I'll burn it at once and see what happens." He tore off the leaf and put the rest of the book in its secret hiding place. Then, folding the paper double, he placed it on the top of his stool, lighted a match, and set fire to it. It made a horrid smudge for so small a paper, and the king sat on the edge of the bed and watched it eagerly. When the smoke cleared away, he was surprised to see, sitting upon the stool, a round little man who, with folded arms and crossed legs, sat calmly facing the king and smoking a black briarwood pipe. "Well, here I am," said he. "So I see," replied the little king. "But how did you get here?" "Didn't you burn the paper?" demanded the round man by way of answer. "Yes, I did," acknowledged the king. "Then you are in trouble, and I've come to help you out of it. I'm the slave of the royal bedstead." "Oh," said the king, "I didn't know there was one." "Neither did your father, or he would not have been so foolish as to sell everything he had for money. By the way, it's lucky for you he did not sell this bedstead. Now then, what do you want?" I'm not sure what I want, replied the king, but I know what I don't want, and that is the old woman who is going to marry me. That's easy enough, said the slave of the royal bedstead. All you need do is to return her the money she paid the chief counselor and declare the match off. Don't be afraid. You are the king, and your word is law. To be sure, said the majesty, but I am in great need of money. How am I going to live if the chief counselor returns to Marianne Brzezinski her millions? Phoo! That's easy enough, again answered the man, and putting his hand in his pocket, he drew out and tossed to the king an old-fashioned leather purse. Keep that with you, said he, and you will always be rich, for you can take out of the purse as many 25-cent silver pieces as you wish, one at a time. No matter how often you take one out, another will instantly appear in its place within the purse. Thank you, said the king gratefully. You have rendered me a rare favor, for now I shall have money for all my needs and will not be obliged to marry anyone. Thank you 1,000 times. Don't mention it, answered the other, puffing his pipe slowly and watching the smoke curl into the moonlight. Such things are easy to me. Is that all you want? All I can think of just now, returned the king. Then please close that secret panel in the bedstead, said the man. The other leaves of the book may be of use to you some time. The boy stood upon the bed as before and, reaching up, closed the opening so that no one else could discover it. Then he turned to face his visitor, but the slave of the royal bedstead had disappeared. I expected that, said his majesty, yet I am sorry he did not wait to say goodbye. With a lightened heart and a sense of great relief, the boy king placed the leathern purse underneath his pillow, and climbing into bed again, slept soundly until morning. When the sun rose, his majesty rose also, refreshed and comforted, and the first thing he did was to send for the chief counselor. That mighty personage arrived looking glum and unhappy, but the boy was too full of his own good fortune to notice it. Said he, I have decided not to marry anyone, for I have just come into a fortune of my own. Therefore I command you return to that old woman the money she has paid you for the right to wear the coronet of the Queen of Quock, and make public declaration that the wedding will not take place. Hearing this, the counselor began to tremble, for he saw the young king had decided to reign in earnest, and he looked so guilty that his majesty inquired, Well, what is the matter now? Sire, replied the wretch in a shaking voice, I cannot return the woman her money, for I have lost it. Lost it, cried the king in mingled astonishment and anger. Even so, your majesty. On my way home from the auction last night, I stopped at the drugstore to get some potash lozenges for my throat, which was dry and hoarse with so much loud talking, and your majesty will admit it was through my efforts the woman was induced to pay so great a price. While going into the drugstore, I carelessly left the package of money lying on the seat of my carriage, and when I came out again it was gone, nor was the thief anywhere to be seen. "Did you call the police?" asked the king. "Yes, I called, but they were all on the next block, and although they have promised to search for the robber, I have little hope they will ever find him." The king sighed. "What shall we do now?" he asked. "I fear you must marry Mary Ann Brodzinski," answered the chief counselor, "unless indeed you order the executioner to cut her head off." "That would be wrong," declared the king. "The woman must not be harmed, and it is just that we return her money, for I will not marry her under any circumstances." "Is that private fortune you mentioned large enough to repay her?" asked the counselor. "Why, yes," said the king thoughtfully. "But it will take some time to do it, and that shall be your task. Call the woman here." The counselor went in search of Mary Ann, who, when she heard she was not to become a queen, but would receive her money back, flew into a violent passion and boxed the chief counselor's ears so viciously that they stung for nearly an hour. But she followed him into the king's audience chamber, where she demanded her money in a loud voice, claiming as well the interest due upon it overnight. "The counselor has lost your money," said the boy king, "but he shall pay you every penny out of my own private purse. I fear, however, you will be obliged to take it in small change." "That will not matter," she said, scowling upon the counselor as if she longed to reach his ears again. "I don't care how small the change is so long as I get every penny that belongs to me, and the interest." "Where is it?" "Here," answered the king, handing the counselor the leathern purse. "It is all in silver quarters, and they must be taken from the purse one at a time. But there will be plenty to pay your demands, and to spare." So, there being no chairs, the counselor sat down upon the floor in one corner and began counting out silver 25-cent pieces from the purse, one by one. And the old woman sat upon the floor opposite him and took each piece of money from his hand. It was a large sum, 3,900,624.16, and it takes 4 times as many 25-cent pieces as it would dollars to make up the amount. The king left them sitting there and went to school, and often thereafter he came to the counselor and interrupted him long enough to get from the purse what money he needed to reign in a proper and dignified manner. This somewhat delayed the counting, but as it was a long job anyway, that did not matter much. The king grew to manhood and married the pretty daughter of the armorer, and they now have 2 lovely children of their own. Once in a while they go into the big audience chamber of the palace and let the little ones watch the aged, hoary-headed counselor count out silver 25-cent pieces to a withered old woman who watched his every movement to see that he does not cheat her. It is a big sum, 3,900,000, $624.16 in 25-cent pieces. But this is how the counselor was punished for being so careless with the woman's money. And this is how Mary Ann Brodzinski de la Porcus was also punished for wishing to marry a 10-year-old king in order that she might wear the coronet of the Queen of Quok. Mama had gone downtown to shop. She had asked Nora to look after Jane Gladys, and Nora promised she would. But it was her afternoon for polishing the silver, so she stayed in the pantry and left Jane Gladys to amuse herself alone in the big sitting room upstairs. The little girl did not mind being alone, for she was working on her first piece of embroidery, a sofa pillow for Papa's birthday present. So she crept into the big bay window and curled herself up on the broad sill while she bent her brown head over her work. Soon the door opened and closed again, quietly. Jane Gladys thought it was Nora, so she didn't look up until she had taken a couple more stitches on a forget-me-not. Then she raised her eyes and was astonished to find a strange man in the middle of the room who regarded her earnestly. He was short and fat and seemed to be breathing heavily from his climb up the stairs. He held a work silk hat in one hand, and underneath his other elbow was tucked a good-sized book. He was dressed in a black suit that looked old and rather shabby, and his head was bald upon the top. "Excuse me," he said, while the child gazed at him in solemn surprise. "Are you Jane Gladys Brown?" "Yes, sir," she answered. Very good indeed," he remarked with a queer sort of smile. "I've had quite a hunt to find you, but I've succeeded at last." "How did you get in?" inquired Jane Gladys with a growing distrust of her visitor. "That is a secret," he said mysteriously. This was enough to put the girl on her guard. She looked at the man, and the man looked at her, and both looks were grave and somewhat anxious. "What do you want?" she asked, straightening herself up with a dignified air. "Ah, now we are coming to business," said the man briskly. "I'm going to be quite frank with you. To begin with, your father has abused me in a most ungentlemanly manner." Jane Gladys got off the window-sill and pointed her small finger at the door. "Leave this room immediately," she cried, her voice trembling with indignation. "My papa is the best man in the world. He never bust anybody." "Allow me to explain, please," said the visitor, without paying any attention to her request to go away. "Your father may be very kind to you, for you are his little girl, you know. But when he's downtown in his office, he's inclined to be rather severe, especially on book agents. Now I called on him the other day and asked him to buy the complete works of Peter Smith. And what do you suppose he did?" She said nothing. "Why?" continued the man with growing excitement. "He ordered me from his office and had me put out of the building by the janitor. What do you think of such treatment as that from the best papa in the world, eh? I think he was quite right, said Jane Gladys. Oh, you do? Well, said the man, I resolved to be revenged for the insult. So, as your father is big and strong and a dangerous man, I have decided to be revenged upon his little girl. Jane Gladys shivered. What are you going to do? She asked. I'm going to present you with this book, he answered, taking it from under his arm. Then he sat down on the edge of a chair, placed his hat on the rug, and drew a fountain pen from his vest pocket. I'll write your name in it, said he. How do you spell Gladys? Gladys, she replied. Thank you. Now this, he continued, rising and handing her the book with a bow, is my revenge for your father's treatment of me. Perhaps he'll be sorry he didn't buy the complete works of Peter Smith. Goodbye, my dear. He walked to the door, gave her another bow, and left the room, and Jane Gladys could see that he was laughing to himself as if very much amused. When the door had closed behind the queer little man, the child sat down in the window again and glanced at the book. It had a red and yellow cover, and the word Thingamajigs was across the front in big letters. Then she opened it, curiously, and saw her name written in black letters upon the first white leaf. He was a funny little man, she said to herself thoughtfully. She turned the next leaf and saw a big picture of a clown, dressed in green and red and yellow, and having a very white face with 3-cornered spots of red on each cheek and over the eyes. While she looked at this, the book trembled in her hands. The leaf crackled and creaked, and suddenly the clown jumped out of it and stood upon the floor beside her, becoming instantly as big as any ordinary clown. After stretching his arms and legs and yawning in a rather impolite manner, he gave a silly chuckle and said, "This is better. You don't know how cramped one gets standing so long upon a page of flat paper." Perhaps you can imagine how startled Jane Gladys was, and how she stared at the clown who had just leaped out of the book. You didn't expect anything of this sort, did you? He asked, leering at her in clown fashion. Then he turned around to take a look at the room, and Jane Gladys laughed in spite of her astonishment. "What amuses you?" demanded the clown. "Why, the back of you is all white," cried the girl. "You're only a clown in front of you." "Quite likely," he returned in an annoyed tone. "The artist made a front view of me. He wasn't expected to make the back of me, for that was against the page of the book." "But it makes you look so funny," said Jane Gladys, laughing until her eyes were moist with tears. The clown looked sulky and sat down upon a chair so she couldn't see his back. "I'm not the only thing in the book," he remarked crossly. This reminded her to turn another page, and she had scarcely noted that it contained the picture of a monkey when the animal sprang from the book with a great crumpling of paper and landed upon the window seat beside her. "Hee, hee, 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 hee," chattered the creature, springing to the girl's shoulder and then to the center table. "This is great fun. Now I can be a real monkey instead of a picture of one." "Real monkeys can't talk," said Jane Gladys reprovingly. "How do you know? Have you ever been one yourself?" inquired the animal. And then he laughed loudly, and the clown laughed too, as if he enjoyed the remark. The girl was quite bewildered by this time. She thoughtlessly turned another leaf, and before she had time to look twice, a gray donkey leaped from the book and stumbled from the window seat to the floor with a great clatter. "You're clumsy enough, I'm sure," said the child indignantly, for the beast had nearly upset her. "Clumsy? And why not?" demanded the donkey with angry voice. "If the fool artist had drawn you out of perspective as he did me, I guess you'd be clumsy yourself." "What's wrong with you?" asked Jane Gladys. "My front and rear legs on the left side are nearly 6 inches too short. That's what's the matter. If that artist didn't know how to draw properly, why did he try to make a donkey at all?" "I don't know," replied the child, seeing an answer was expected. "I can hardly stand up," grumbled the donkey, "and the least little thing will topple me over." "Don't mind that," said the monkey, making a spring at the chandelier and swinging from it by his tail until Jane Gladys feared he would knock all the globes off. "The same artist has made my ears as big as that clown's, and everyone knows a monkey hasn't any ears to speak of, much less to draw." "He should be prosecuted," remarked the clown gloomily. "I haven't any back." Jane Gladys looked from one to the other with a puzzled expression upon her sweet face, and turned another page of the book. Swift as a flash there sprang over her shoulder a tawny, spotted leopard, which landed upon the back of a big leather armchair and turned upon the others with a fierce movement. The monkey climbed to the top of the chandelier and chattered with fright. The donkey tried to run and straightway tipped over on his left side. The clown grew paler than ever, but he sat still in his chair and gave a low whistle of surprise. The leopard crouched upon the back of the chair, lashed his tail from side to side, and glared at all of them by turns, including Jane Gladys. "Which of us are you going to attack first?" asked the donkey, trying hard to get upon his feet again. "I can't attack any of you," snarled the leopard. "The artist made my mouth shut, so I haven't any teeth, and he forgot to make my claws. But I'm a frightful-looking creature nevertheless, am I not?" "Oh, yes," said the clown indifferently. "I suppose you're frightful-looking enough. But if you have no teeth nor claws, we don't mind your looks at all." This so annoyed the leopard that he growled horribly, and the monkey laughed at him. Just then the book slipped from the girl's lap, and as she made a movement to catch it, one of the pages near the back opened wide. She caught a glimpse of a fierce grizzly bear looking at her from the page, and quickly threw the book from her. It fell with a crash in the middle of the room, but beside it stood the great grizzly, who had wrenched himself from the page before the book closed. "Now," cried the leopard from his perch, "you'd better look out for yourselves. You can't laugh at him as you did at me. The bear has both claws and teeth." "Indeed I have," said the bear in a low, deep, growling voice. "And I know how to use them too. If you read in that book, you'll find I'm described as a horrible, cruel, and remorseless grizzly whose only business in life is to eat up little girls, shoes, dresses, ribbons, and all." And then the author says, "I smack my lips and glory in my wickedness." "That's awful," said the donkey, sitting upon his haunches and shaking his head sadly. "What do you suppose possessed the author to make you so hungry for girls? Do you eat animals also?" "The author does not mention my eating anything but little girls," replied the bear. "Very good," remarked the clown, drawing a long breath of relief. "You may begin eating Jane Gladys as soon as you wish. She laughed because I had no back." "And she laughed because my legs are out of perspective," brayed the donkey. "But you also deserve to be eaten," screamed the leopard from the back of the leather chair. "For you laughed and poked fun at me because I had no claws nor teeth. Don't you suppose, Mr. Grizzly, you could manage to eat a clown, a donkey, and a monkey after you finish the girl?" "Perhaps so, and a leopard into the bargain," growled the bear. "It will depend on how hungry I am, but I must begin on the little girl first because the author says I prefer girls to anything." Jane Gladys was much frightened on hearing this conversation, and she began to realize what the man meant when he said he gave her the book to be revenged. Surely Papa would be sorry he hadn't bought the complete works of Peter Smith when he came home and found his little girl eaten up by a grizzly bear, shoes, dress, ribbons, and all. The bear stood up and balanced himself on his rear legs. "This is the way I look in the book," he said. "Now watch me eat the little girl." He advanced slowly toward Jane Gladys, and the monkey, the leopard, the donkey, and the clown all stood around in a circle and watched the bear with much interest. But before the grizzly reached her, the child had a sudden thought and cried out, "Stop! You mustn't eat me. It would be wrong." "Why?" asked the bear in surprise. "Because I own you. You're my private property," she answered. "I don't see how you make that out," said the bear in a disappointed tone. "Why, the book was given to me. My name's on the front leaf, and you belong by rights in the book, so you mustn't dare to eat your owner." The grizzly hesitated. "Can any of you read?" he asked. "I can," said the clown. "Then see if she speaks the truth. Is her name really in the book?" The clown picked it up and looked at the name. "It is," said he. "Jane Gladys Brown," and written quite plainly in big letters. The bear sighed. "Then of course I can't eat her," he decided. "That author is as disappointing as most authors are." "But he's not as bad as the artist," exclaimed the donkey, who was still trying to stand up straight. "The fault lies with yourselves," said Jane Gladys severely. "Why didn't you stay in the book where you were put?" The animals looked at each other in a foolish way, and the clown blushed under his white paint. "Really," began the bear, and then he stopped short. The doorbell rang loudly. "It's Mama!" cried Jane Gladys, springing to her feet. "She's come home at last. Now, you stupid creatures." But she was interrupted by them all making a rush for the book. There was a swish and a whir and a rustling of leaves, and an instant later the book lay upon the floor, looking just like any other book, while Jane Gladys's strange companions had all disappeared. This story should teach us to think quickly and clearly upon all occasions. For had Jane Gladys not remembered that she owned the bear, he probably would have eaten her before the bell rang. Not many years ago, there lived on a stony, barren New England farm a man and his wife. They were sober, honest people, working hard from early morning until dark to enable them to secure a scanty living from their poor land. Their house, a small one-storied building, stood upon the side of a steep hill, and the stones lay so thickly about it that scarce anything green could grow from the ground. At the foot of the hill, a quarter of a mile from the house by the winding path, was a small brook, and the woman was obliged to go there for water and to carry it up the hill to the house. This was a tedious task, and with the other hard work that fell to her share had made her gaunt and bent and lean. Yet she never complained, but meekly and faithfully performed her duties, doing the housework, carrying the water, and helping her husband hoe the scanty crop that grew upon the best part of their land. One day, as she walked down the path to the brook, her big shoes scattering the pebbles right and left, she noticed a large beetle lying upon its back and struggling hard with its little legs to turn over, that its feet might again touch the ground. But this it could not accomplish, so the woman, who had a kind heart, reached down and gently turned the beetle with her finger. At once it scampered from the path, and she went on to the brook. The next day, as she came for water, she was surprised to see the beetle again lying upon its back and struggling helplessly to turn. Once more the woman stopped and set him upon his feet, and then, as she stooped over the tiny creature, she heard a small voice say, "Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for saving me." Half frightened at hearing a beetle speak in her own language, the woman started back and exclaimed, "La sakes! Surely you can't talk like humans." Then, recovering from her alarm, she again bent over the beetle, who answered her. "Why shouldn't I talk if I have anything to say?" "'Cause you're a bug," replied the woman. "That is true, and you saved my life, saved me from my enemies, the sparrows. And this is the second time you have come to my assistance, so I owe you a debt of gratitude. Bugs value their lives as much as human beings, and I am a more important creature than you, in your ignorance, may suppose. But tell me, why do you come each day to the brook?" "For water," she answered, staring stupidly down at the talking beetle. "Isn't it hard work?" the creature inquired. "Yes, but there's no water on the hill," said she. "Then dig a well and put a pump in it," replied the beetle. She shook her head. "My man tried it once, but there was no water," she said sadly. "Try it again," commanded the beetle, "and in return for your kindness to me I will make this promise. If you do not get water from the well, you will get that which is more precious to you. I must go now. Do not forget. Dig a well." And then, without pausing to say goodbye, it ran swiftly away and was lost among the stones. The woman returned to the house much perplexed by what the beetle had said, and when her husband came in from his work, she told him the whole story. The poor man thought deeply for a time, and then declared, "Wife, there may be truth in what the bug told you. There must be magic in the world yet, if a beetle can speak. And if there is such a thing as magic, we may get water from the well. The pump I bought to use in the well, which proved to be dry, is now lying in the barn, and the only expense in following the talking bug's advice will be the labor of digging the hole. Labor I am used to, so I will dig the well." Next day he set about it and dug so far down in the ground that he could hardly reach the top to climb out again, but not a drop of water was found. "Perhaps you did not dig deep enough," his wife said when he told her of his failure. So the following day he made a long ladder, which he put into the hole, and then he dug and dug and dug until the top of the ladder barely reached the top of the hole, but still there was no water. When the woman next went to the brook with her pail, she saw the beetle sitting upon a stone beside her path. So she stopped and said, "My husband has dug the well, but there is no water." "Did he put the pump in the well?" asked the beetle. "No," she answered. "Then do as I commanded. Put in the pump, and if you do not get water, I promise you something still more precious." Saying which, the beetle swiftly slid from the stone and disappeared. The woman went back to the house and told her husband what the bug had said. "Well," replied the simple fellow, "there can be no harm in trying." So he got the pump from the barn and placed it in the well, and then he took hold of the handle and began to pump, while his wife stood by to watch what would happen. No water came, but after a few moments a gold piece dropped from the spout of the pump, and then another and another, until several handfuls of gold lay in a little heap upon the ground. The man stopped pumping then, and ran to help his wife gather the gold pieces into her apron. But their hands trembled so greatly through excitement and joy that they could scarcely pick up the sparkling coins. At last she gathered them close to her bosom, and together they ran to the house, where they emptied the precious gold upon the table and counted the pieces. All were stamped with the design of the United States Mint and were worth $5 each. Some were worn and somewhat discolored from use, while others seemed bright and new, as if they had not been much handled. When the value of the pieces was added together, they were found to be worth $300. Suddenly the woman spoke. "Husband, The beetle said truly when he declared we should get something more precious than water from the well. But run at once and take away the handle from the pump, lest anyone should pass this way and discover our secret. So the man ran to the pump and removed the handle, which he carried to the house and hid underneath the bed. They hardly slept a wink that night, lying awake to think of their good fortune and what they should do with their store of yellow gold. In all their former lives they had never possessed more than a few dollars at a time, and now the cracked teapot was nearly full of gold coins. The following day was Sunday, and they arose early and ran to see if their treasure was safe. There it lay, heaped snugly within the teapot, and they were so willing to feast their eyes upon it that it was long before the man could leave it to build the fire or the woman to cook the breakfast. While they ate their simple meal, the woman said, "We will go to church today and return thanks for the riches that have come to us so suddenly, and I will give the pastor one of the gold pieces." "It is well enough to go to church," replied her husband, "and also to return thanks. But in the night I decided how we will spend all our money, so there will be none left for the pastor." "We can pump more," said the woman. "Perhaps, and perhaps not," he answered cautiously. "What we have we can depend upon, but whether or not there be more in the well I cannot say." "Then go and find out," she returned, "for I am anxious to give something to the pastor who is a poor man and deserving." So the man got the pump handle from beneath the bed, and going to the pump, fitted it in place. Then he set a large wooden bucket under the spout and began to pump. To their joy, the gold pieces soon began flowing into the pail, and seeing it about to run over the brim, the woman brought another pail. But now the stream suddenly stopped, and the man said cheerfully, "That is enough for today, good wife. We have added greatly to our treasure, and the parson shall have his gold piece. Indeed, I think I shall also put a coin into the contribution box." Then, because the teapot would hold no more gold, the farmer emptied the pail into the wood box, covering the money with dried leaves and twigs, that no one might suspect what lay underneath. Afterward they dressed themselves in their best clothing and started for the church, each taking a bright gold piece from the teapot as a gift to the pastor. Over the hill and down into the valley beyond they walked, feeling so gay and light-hearted that they did not mind the distance at all. At last they came to the little country church and entered just as the services began. Being proud of their wealth and of the gifts they had brought for the pastor, they could scarcely wait for the moment when the deacon passed the contribution box. But at last the time came, and the farmer held his hand high over the box and dropped the gold piece so that all the congregation could see what he had given. The woman did likewise, feeling important and happy at being able to give the good parson so much. The parson, watching from the pulpit, saw the gold drop into the box, and could hardly believe that his eyes did not deceive him. However, when the box was laid upon his desk, there were the 2 gold pieces, and he was so surprised that he nearly forgot his sermon. When the people were leaving the church at the close of the services, the good man stopped the farmer and his wife and asked, "Where did you get so much gold?" The woman gladly told him how she had rescued the beetle, and how, in return, they had been rewarded with the wonderful pump. The pastor listened to it all gravely, and when the story was finished, he said, "According to tradition, strange things happened in this world ages ago, and now I find that strange things may also happen today. For by your tale you have found a beetle that can speak and also has power to bestow upon you great wealth." Then he looked carefully at the gold pieces and continued, "Either this money is fairy gold or it is genuine metal, stamped at the mint of the United States government. If it is fairy gold, it will disappear within 24 hours, and will therefore do no one any good. If it is real money, then your beetle must have robbed someone of the gold and placed it in your well. For all money belongs to someone, and if you have not earned it honestly, but have come by it in the mysterious way you mention, it was surely taken from the persons who owned it without their consent. Where else could real money come from?" The farmer and his wife were confused by this statement and looked guiltily at each other, for they were honest people and wished to wrong no one. "Then you think the beetle stole the money?" asked the woman. "By his magic powers he probably took it from its rightful owners. Even bugs which can speak have no consciences and cannot tell the difference between right and wrong. With a desire to reward you for your kindness, the beetle took from its lawful possessors the money you pumped from the well." "Perhaps it really is fairy gold," suggested the man. "If so, we must go to the town and spend the money before it disappears." "That would be wrong," answered the pastor, "for then the merchants would have neither money nor goods. To give them fairy gold would be to rob them." "What then shall we do?" asked the poor woman, wringing her hands with grief and disappointment. "Go home and wait until tomorrow. If the gold is then in your possession, it is real money and not fairy gold. But if it is real money, you must try to restore it to its rightful owners. Take also these pieces which you have given me, for I cannot accept gold that is not honestly come by." Sadly, the poor people returned to their home, being greatly disturbed by what they had heard. Another sleepless night was passed, and on Monday morning they arose at daylight and ran to see if the gold was still visible. "It is real money after all," cried the man, "for not a single piece has disappeared." When the woman went to the brook that day, she looked for the beetle, and sure enough, there he sat upon the flat stone. "Are you happy now?" asked the beetle, as the woman paused before him. "We are very unhappy," she answered. "For, although you have given us much gold, our good parson says it surely belongs to someone else, and was stolen by you to reward us." "Your parson may be a good man," returned the beetle with some indignation, "but he certainly is not overwise. Nevertheless, if you do not want the gold, I can take it from you as easily as I gave it." "But we do want it," cried the woman fearfully. "That is," she added, "if it is honestly come by." "It is not stolen," replied the beetle sulkily, "and now belongs to no one but yourselves. When you saved my life, I thought how I might reward you, and knowing you to be poor, I decided gold would make you happier than anything else. You must know," he continued, "that although I appear so small and insignificant, I am really king of all the insects, and my people obey my slightest wish. Living as they do close to the ground, the insects often come across gold and other pieces of money which have been lost by men and have fallen into cracks or crevasses, or become covered with earth or hidden by grass or weeds. Whenever my people find money in this way, they report the fact to me, but I have always let it lie, because it could be of no possible use to an insect. However, when I decided to give you gold, I knew just where to obtain it without robbing any of your fellow creatures. Thousands of insects were at once sent by me in every direction to bring the pieces of lost gold to this hill. It cost my people several days of hard labor, as you may suppose. But by the time your husband had finished the well, the gold began to arrive from all parts of the country, and during the night my subjects dumped it all into the well, so you may use it with a clear conscience, knowing that you wrong no one." This explanation delighted the woman, and when she returned to the house and reported to her husband what the beetle had said, he also was overjoyed. So they at once took a number of the gold pieces and went to the town to purchase provisions and clothing and many things of which they had long stood in need. But so proud were they of their newly acquired wealth that they took no pains to conceal it. They wanted everyone to know they had money, and so it was no wonder that when some of the wicked men in the village saw the gold, they longed to possess it themselves. "If they spend this money so freely," whispered one to another, "there must be a great store of gold at their home." "That is true," was the answer. "Let us hasten there before they return and ransack the house." So they left the village and hurried away to the farm on the hill, where they broke down the door and turned everything topsy-turvy until they had discovered the gold in the wood box and the teapot. It did not take them long to make this into bundles, which they slung upon their backs and carried off, and it was probably because they were in a great hurry that they did not stop to put the house in order again. Presently the good woman and her husband came up the hill from the village with their arms full of bundles, and followed by a crowd of small boys who had been hired to help carry the purchases. Then followed others, youngsters and country louts, attracted by the wealth and prodigality of the pair, who from simple curiosity trailed along behind like the tail of a comet, and helped swell the concourse into a triumphal procession. Last of all came Guggins, the shopkeeper, carrying with much tenderness a new silk dress which was to be paid for when they reached the house, all the money they had taken to the village having been lavishly expended. The farmer, who had formerly been a modest man, was now so swelled with pride that he tipped the rim of his hat over his left ear and smoked a big cigar that was fast making him ill. His wife strutted along beside him like a peacock, enjoying to the full the homage and respect her wealth had won from those who formerly deigned not to notice her, and glancing from time to time at the admiring procession in the rear. But alas for their newborn pride! When they reached the farmhouse, they found the door broken in, the furniture strewn in all directions, and their treasure stolen to the very last gold piece. The crowd grinned and made slighting remarks of a personal nature, and Guggins, the shopkeeper, demanded in a loud voice the money for the silk dress he had brought. Then the woman whispered to her husband to run and pump some more gold while she kept the crowd quiet, and he obeyed quickly. But after a few moments he returned with a white face to tell her the pump was dry, and not a gold piece could now be coaxed from the spout. The procession marched back to the village, laughing and jeering at the farmer and his wife, who had pretended to be so rich, and some of the boys were naughty enough to throw stones at the house from the top of the hill. Mr. Guggins carried away his dress after severely scolding the woman for deceiving him, and when the couple at last found themselves alone, their pride had turned to humiliation and their joy to bitter grief. Just before sundown, the woman dried her eyes and, having resumed her ordinary attire, went to the brook for water. When she came to the flat stone, she saw the king beetle sitting upon it. "The well is dry," she cried out angrily. "Yes," answered the beetle calmly. "You have pumped from it all the gold my people could find." "But we are now ruined," said the woman, sitting down in the path beginning to weep. "For robbers have stolen from us every penny we possessed." "I'm sorry," returned the beetle, "but it is your own fault. Had you not made so great a show of your wealth, no one would have suspected you possessed a treasure or thought to rob you. As it is, you have merely lost the gold which others have lost before you. It will probably be lost many times more before the world comes to an end." "But what are we to do now?" she asked. "What did you do before I gave you the money?" "We worked from morning till night," said she. "Then work still remains for you," remarked the beetle composedly. "No one will ever try to rob you of that, you may be sure." And he slid from the stone and disappeared for the last time. This story should teach us to accept good fortune with humble hearts and to use it with moderation. For had the farmer and his wife resisted the temptation to display their wealth ostentatiously, they might have retained it to this very day. And now, as we come to the end of this session, if you're still awake, I would like you to feel the calm you've created within yourself. You've given your mind and body such a beautiful gift, a moment to simply be. Let that sense of peace stay with you as you move through the rest of your night. If you'd like, you can stay here a little